The moment they summoned me into that windowless room, the air felt as if it had already made its decision about me, thick, suffocating, almost predatory. The corridor leading to HR had always been sterile, but that day every step echoed like a sentence being carried out. The walls swallowed sound, swallowed hope, swallowed reason, leaving only the quiet tremor of something inside me bracing for impact. When I entered, they barely looked up. Their faces were the color of old paper, blank, dry, already creased by decisions made long before I arrived. 3 of them sat across from me, a tribunal carved from indifference. Their laptops glowed with a cold blue light that illuminated nothing but the fact that my fate had been reduced to bullet points and HR terminology. "We've discovered," the woman in the center began, her voice devoid of warmth, "that you've been working 2 jobs. The words dropped like a blade, sharp and rehearsed. I felt my breath stumble. 2 jobs. I repeated, my voice brittle, as if any louder it might break me entirely. They pressed on without hesitation, without humanity, reading from a script that couldn't capture even a fraction of the truth. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask who I was supporting. They didn't ask what I had endured. To them, it was simple. Accusation equals guilt, and guilt equals termination. My years of loyalty, my nights spent stitching deadlines into my skin, my exhaustion that had become a second heartbeat, none of it mattered. They had already decided the story they wanted to tell about me. In that room, something inside me cracked, not a loud break, but a subtle, devastating split, like the quiet fracture of ice beneath a lonely boot. It wasn't just the injustice. It was the realization that they hadn't even cared enough to uncover the truth. They hadn't cared enough to know what my 2 jobs really were. And yet, beneath the humiliation, beneath the rising ache in my chest, a deeper truth stirred, a truth they had overlooked, a truth that would become the very thing that would one day undo them. When I walked out of that room, unemployed, humiliated, stripped of everything except the fire inside me, I thought I had lost. But that was the moment everything actually began. Because they had overlooked the one thing they shouldn't have. The truth that would one day bring their entire empire crashing down. The corridor leading to HR felt unusually narrow that morning, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I'd been called in without explanation, no warning, no context, just a curt email that carried more dread than information. Each step echoed sharply, like a countdown to something irreversible. When I entered the HR room, the air felt artificially cold, as if intentionally stripped of warmth. 2 HR representatives sat behind a wide, polished table. Their hands rested on papers neatly stacked, ready to deliver judgment that had clearly been rehearsed long before I arrived. "Please sit," one of them said. Not a greeting, just an instruction. I sat, my pulse drumming at the base of my throat. The HR rep began reading. "We've received credible information that you have been working a 2nd job without disclosure. This is a violation of company policy." The words cut through me like a sudden, uninvited blade. "Working a 2nd job?" I stared at them, disbelief tightening in my chest. "There must be some mistake," I said quietly. "You didn't even ask." "We've already reviewed the situation," she interrupted, her voice flat. "Reviewed? Meaning finalized. But you don't know anything about." "It doesn't change the violation," the other rep said. Their eyes were distant, cold, and utterly uninterested in anything I could say. My years at the company, my late nights, my sacrifices, my disappearing weekends, none of it mattered in that room. I realized in that moment that loyalty was a one-way contract here. I had upheld my side. They had never intended to uphold theirs. They proceeded mechanically. Termination effective immediately, system access revoked, final payout processed. Each line felt like another thread snapping from the fabric of the life I had built there. Their tone never shifted, never softened. It felt less like a termination meeting and more like a script they had repeated too many times to care. I wanted to speak, to explain the truth, the real truth, but something inside me stopped. Their expressions told me everything. Even if I poured my entire story onto the table, they wouldn't pick up a single piece of it. "Any questions?" The question was almost cruel. "No," I replied, because questions only matter where answers exist, and here none did. I stood up slowly, feeling a humiliation so heavy it made my legs unsteady. The hallway outside felt hostile, like the building itself had turned against me. When I reached the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A message. From them. The person who needed me more than any job ever had. The person whose care was the so-called second job HR accused me of hiding. Are you coming today? I'm not feeling well. I closed my eyes. That was the job they fired me for. The job they never bothered to ask about. The job that didn't pay me a cent, but cost me sleep, strength, and sometimes my sanity. I sat in my car, trembling, hurt, betrayed, and suddenly aware that my firing wasn't just careless. It felt intentional. And I would soon learn it was. The message pulled me instantly into a world I had kept separate from my corporate life. A world built not on ambition, but on necessity. A world that demanded more from me than any job description ever could. My second shift. Not a job. A responsibility. I drove straight to the small house where they lived. When I arrived, they were sitting on the couch, fragile, pale, trying to smile through discomfort. You made it, they whispered. I'm here, I replied. And, just like that, I slipped into the role HR believed was some secret professional commitment. They had no idea that my nights were spent monitoring medication schedules, regulating breathing machines, calming panic attacks, and ensuring survival through long, unstable hours. I never hid this second life out of guilt. I hid it because the corporate world feeds on weakness like a predator. Show them vulnerability, and you earn a target on your back. For months, I juggled both worlds, office deadlines by day, caretaking by night. My exhaustion was constant, my sleep shallow, and my hope held together by thin strings. But I kept going because someone depended on me in ways HR would never understand. That evening, while preparing medication, I opened my work email one last time out of habit. A forwarded document caught my eye, one I hadn't paid attention to before. It outlined staffing strategies, restructuring, budget cuts, strategic offboarding. At the bottom, my blood went cold. Identify employees with low resistance for early removal. I stared at the words until they blurred. Low resistance. Meaning people who wouldn't fight. People dealing with personal burdens. People exactly like me. I read further. HR wasn't reacting to some report of dual employment. They were following a plan. Names were listed. Reasons were fabricated. Patterns were unmistakable. And among those names, mine was highlighted. For days afterward, even while caring for them, I investigated. Old emails. Archived memos. Strange complaints from colleagues who had quietly resigned. Evidence of performance reviews altered without employee knowledge. A picture formed. A dark one. Employees weren't being evaluated. They were being eliminated cleanly, covertly, efficiently. I realized my firing wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. A tactic. A decision made long before I walked into that room. Something inside me shifted, just slightly at first. A heat. A spark. Something that pushed through exhaustion. A resolve. If they thought I was too weak to fight, they had miscalculated. Once I started digging, the truth poured out faster than I expected. The company was rotten beneath its polished veneer, corruption woven like threads through the foundation. I found emails proving HR collaborated with upper management to remove non-essential staff before annual raises. I uncovered cases where performance issues were fabricated to force resignations. The deeper I went, the sicker I felt. But I didn't stop. I found the stories of people who vanished from the company quietly, forced out, humiliated, misrepresented, accused of violations that didn't exist. Someone had compiled a list of them. A secret document. Names. Dates. Tactics used. I recognized some of the names. People who had spoken up. People who had gotten sick. People who had simply struggled. The company didn't support them. It disposed of them. Then I found the final piece, hidden in a mislabeled folder. A directive from senior leadership instructing HR to create pretexts for termination during financial strain. Dual employment was listed as one such pretext. My hands shook as I read it. Not from fear. From clarity. Every humiliation in that room. Every dismissive look. Every refusal to listen. It was all a performance. A mask worn over a strategy. I had been selected, targeted, marked for removal. And they didn't care who I cared for, or what it cost me, or what the truth was. But now I had everything. Evidence, patterns, documents no company wanted exposed. And with that, something I thought was lost returned to me. Control. When I returned to the company building weeks later, it wasn't with fear. It wasn't with desperation. It wasn't with hope. It was with truth. The receptionist hesitated when I asked to meet HR and upper management, but the confidence in my voice forced approval. When I stepped into the conference room, the same HR faces looked back at me confused, tense, uneasy. They weren't expecting me. They certainly weren't prepared for what I carried. I placed a folder on the table. "We need to discuss the real reason you fired me." They exchanged glances. I began sliding documents across the table. The internal memo identifying low-resistance employees. The list of fabricated pretexts. Evidence of manipulated performance records. Proof of illegal coordination between HR and leadership. Their faces tightened with every page. "This isn't about dual employment," I said softly. "This is about discrimination, misconduct, and a pattern of wrongful terminations." Silence thickened the room. One of them opened their mouth to defend the company, but I interrupted this time, my voice calm and steady. "I'm not here for reinstatement. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to hold you accountable." Then I placed the final document, the one tying all of it directly to leadership, onto the table. "This goes to the labor board, my lawyer, and the press if necessary." Their expressions cracked open fear, disbelief, panic. They finally saw me. Not as a low-resistance employee. Not as a burden. Not as a number. But as the person who could bring their entire machinery down. I stood. "This ends now." And I walked out. The quiet behind me was the sound of a system realizing its downfall had already begun. Outside, the air felt crisp, like a world being rebuilt, not destroyed. They took my job, but I took back my dignity, my voice, my truth. And that was a victory they never saw coming. If this story touched you, if you've ever faced injustice, been silenced, or fought battles no one saw, then stay with me. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together we rise.